Hello everyone. In this chapter, in this clip, I want to explain a basic relationship between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Normally, we think of these two policies are as completely unrelated, that they have no relationship with each other, but well, that's not the case. I'm going to explain you why. So let's start by talking about three basic possibilities. These possibilities, 1, 2, and 3, are as follows. When the tax revenue collected by the federal government is exactly the same as government expenditures, that means the government is not spending more, it's not spending less, it's spending exactly the same amount it collects as tax revenue, we say that the fiscal budget is balanced, right? Now, this doesn't happen very often, at least it has not happened often in recent years, but it's possible, and of course it has happened many times in the past. Now, a more interesting case is the following. What happens when tax revenue is less than government expenditures? So government is spending more money than what the government is collecting through tax revenue. And of course, the revenue comes from individual income tax, corporate income tax, and other kinds of taxes. So the point is, the government is spending more. Well, of course, we know that this implies a deficit, right? Now, the question is, where is this money coming from? How is it possible that the government is spending more money than the money is collecting? Well, the answer is yes. The government borrows money from the public. How do they do that? Well, in the case of the US, but of course other governments around the world have similar arrangements, institutional arrangements. In the case of the US Treasury is going to issue and sell securities through open market operations. Yes, through the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve Bank. And of course, I'm talking about treasury bills, treasury bonds, and so forth. Now, in order to sell securities, sometimes it's necessary for the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates so that consumers, the public out there, are more inclined to buy these treasury bills and treasury bonds. In other words, are more inclined to save. So if you remember from the previous chapter, when interest rates go up and savings go up and consumption goes down, as the same as investment, we say that this type of policy is contractionary. So this is not always the case, but this is the most common case, contractionary policy. That, well, a deficit produces this type of outcome. Now, of course, it is also possible that in a different year, the tax revenue collected by the government is larger than government expenditures. And of course, we say that the fiscal budget now is at a surplus, right? Now, what happens in this case? Well, now that the government is collecting more money than what it's expending, well, the government is in a position to pay some of this money back to the public, right? And they do that by not selling, but now buying the securities from us. So we used to have the treasury bills and treasury bonds in our savings accounts, but now the government is buying them from us through, once again, open market operations. And of course, in order to do that, normally they have to create a negative incentive so that we let them go, interest rates go down, and as a consequence, we normally think of this as a expansionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy. So once again, a surplus could generate a expansionary monetary policy. Now, this is actually more interesting because if you think about what's going on here, and I'm sure you have an interest on this, what we call the national debt of any country, at least the public debt, It comes from borrowing money this way. So if you have a series of years, one after the other, when the fiscal budget is in a deficit, well, the government has to borrow money one year and borrow more money the next year, and this borrowing accumulates over time, which generates this debt, which in this country, as many other countries around the world, is pretty high. But you can also see here what's the way to pay it back. Well, the government will have to reverse from a deficit to a surplus in order to generate the money to reduce and eventually, hopefully, pay the debt. So, again, I hope you have a better idea of how these policies are related to each other and the importance of understanding, fiscal budget, balance, deficit, surplus, and of course, contractionary and expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. All right, until next clip.